Welcome to MGoRadio 10.10, and we know what the people want. They want an exhaustive breakdown of the Northwestern Wildcats, Michigan's next opponent. So let's get right into it. Alex.
That is not true, Brian.
Alex,
that is not true. Don't do that to him. Don't do that to him. It's obvious what the people want. They want to hear our thoughts about the Oregon and Indiana games after we broke them down. So let's talk about upon further review. Actually, you know what they really want, Brian?
What?
Our sponsors.
Sponsors? No, they want. What are you talking about?
This is people who listen to the podcast. This is what it really looks like during those segues. It's like, oh, good segue, and then it's like a minute while he pulls it up.
All right, fine. We want to thank Underground Printing. Rishi and Ryan have been our biggest supporters since the first message board first made up What Recruit Got Paid. Gear up at ugpmichiganapparel.com or check out our selection on mgoblogstore.com, which will have our book for sale shortly. We also like to thank our associate sponsors, Peak Wealth Management, Realtor and Lender Matt Demers, Human Element, Ann Arbor Elder Law, Champion Circle. Big ups to Champion Circle on this day.
Yes.
Royal Oath Insurance Group, Michigan Law Grad, Widewood Organics, Sharon's Heating and Air Conditioning, Community Pest Solutions, the Autograph app, Signal Wire, where we are recording this, and Venue by 4M, where we will be at 6 o'clock tonight with copies of Victor's, our championship yearbook. All right. So all pleasantries and jokes aside, obviously the news we're going to lead with today is that Bryce Underwood flips from LSU to Michigan. The number one recruit in the country, a quarterback out of Belleville, Michigan, 6'5", 215 pounds, will probably end up at 230 or 240 when it's all said and done. And he's also terribly young for his grade. He won't turn 18 until August. This is not a situation that you often see where a quarterback has been held back a year or two so that when he hits college, he's, ahead of his peers, or he's just advantaged by the fact that he was left back a grade or two physically. This is a Karis LeVert level guy who happens to be the number one recruit in the country.
And he's a guy who, when he was 14 years old, led his team to the state championship. So it's like he's been, people have known about him for a very long time. And the only comparable I can think of is, the talk around Drew Henson. The entire time we were in high school, that people knew about that guy, and it was like, is he going to go to Michigan? Is that it wasn't a question of whether he's going to be awesome in college. It was, this guy has everything. This is exactly what you want in a quarterback, and will Michigan be able to keep him in state? Was the big question all along.
Well, so here is a complete list of every quarterback who is the number one or number two overall recruit since this stuff started happening. Are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Vince Young.
He was pretty good.
Jimmy Clausen.
Okay.
Terrell Pryor. Matt Barkley. Justin Fields. Trevor Lawrence. Bryce Young. Quinn Ewers. And Arch Manning. Now, you probably heard the words Jimmy Clausen, and you're like, Jimmy Clausen. But Clausen was a really good player as a junior and went in the second round of the NFL draft. So that is your floor. Mm-hmm. And every other name on that list was somewhere between a great college quarterback and a Heisman winner. With, Arch Manning is, I guess, yet to be decided. But he's certainly tracking towards what you would expect. So this is a class of recruit that is rare, but also essentially does not have a miss in that list.
Yeah. Can I add a couple historical from Michigan ones?
Sure.
Because, Tom Harmon was this kind of recruit. And
Tom
Harmon was this kind of recruit. And I'm trying to describe how rare this thing is.
You can't say Tom Harmon.
Tom Harmon was this kind of recruit, and then Dennis Franklin.
He was not this kind of recruit.
Well, the entire football establishment knew about that guy. Yeah, but he was also it's going to make or break your program kind of guy. And Dennis Franklin was the other historical one. We mentioned Henson, but Dennis Franklin's another guy who was at the beginning of a shift in how Michigan recruited. right? Michigan was going to suddenly play the game that other schools did, and they went after the number one player in the country. And like the question was, could this guy handle the pressure? I mean, there was an additional pressure because he was the first black quarterback who was going to ever start at Michigan, but it was it was like that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about these kinds of guys who come along every once in a while where everyone pretty much knows this dude just has it. And you watch it, and then every single thing that happens over his high school career just it reinforces the idea that he has it and that getting him is the question, not whether it's going to work out. And now you mentioned Jimmy Clausen, but even Jimmy Clausen wasn't really. I mean, he was a Titanic recruit in an era when people were terrible at ranking them and put way too much on like things that don't matter as much. So, like arm strength was like the number one thing that people cared about.
In Jimmy Clausen's defense, something I never thought I'd say out loud, he was forced to start as a true freshman on a very, very bad Charlie Weiss-led Notre Dame team. Like that, his performance early in his career was not great, but by the time he was a junior, like he was almost what he was supposed to be. And he didn't have an NFL career, but as a college quarterback, once he got his feet under him, he was excellent. Honestly, the guy I thought you were going to bring up when you like, let's go further back in history, was not Tom Harmon, you complete weirdo. Drew Henson.
Oh yeah, I brought up Henson. Yeah.
The other guy who was an in-state recruit, the number one recruit in the country. This was a little bit before, you had a Rivals or a Scout around to like have a network that had some credibility with its rankings. So it was a little bit fuzzier than it is these days. But like in terms of what you might expect from Bryce Underwood, I think Drew Henson is not a bad comparison. Because Henson, he played baseball sort of infamously and was not a super polished Tom Brady type coming out of high school, and I don't think Bryce Underwood is going to be either. But the physical package is the reason that he's the number one recruit in the country, because he is 6'5", and if you watch some of his games, when he starts moving, it does feel like this person should not be able to do this.
Yeah,
like it feels like Vince Young. It feels like that kind of athlete who is just a cut above even the other elite recruits that you would be thinking about.
And for the Alex Drains who are not around for the Drew Henson debut, he was. If you remember back, if people who remember that Syracuse game, where they put Henson in for the first time, he goes like 3 for 7, and everyone remembers all 7 plays because every single one of them was an adventure. Or more recently, like J.J. McCarthy's debut, right? Like that was the kind of event that it was when you just like you saw him dodge a couple guys. He got out of he went over to the sideline and then he threw across the other half of the field. And first time he tried it, the receiver wasn't looking for it, and the second time he tried it, it was a 15-yard reception, I think, on 3rd and 12 or something. But that was like you see it. This is the kind of thing when you watch Bryce Underwood play, you as a football watcher are going to recognize that this guy is something else.
Yeah, and I do. Open question now for Michigan is whether they have committed to start Bryce Underwood next year as part of the deal to get him to Ann Arbor, or if they will look for a portal quarterback. Because, I mean, I'm looking at Underwood's tape. I've watched a couple of, full games at this point. To me, he's a guy who I would probably not want to start as a freshman. All the potential in the world, a guy who could probably function as running quarterback in year one. And by running quarterback, I don't mean that like he's going to be Denard, but he's going to be a guy who has his legs as a major part of what he does as a player. And then the passing is something that comes along over the course of the season. I can see that happening, but also I kind of feel like he might benefit from sitting behind a guy who comes in through the portal for a year, learning the playbook, not having that Jimmy Clausen season where he's getting hit all the time because maybe the offensive line isn't going to be the greatest next year, and maybe he's not going to be reading defenses with the confidence and quickness that you want to have your quarterback get the ball out and not get hurt, not get that sped up clock that we saw with Devin Gardner.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting because Michigan was rumored to be heavily involved with Miller Moss after he was benched at USC. And for a guy who could come in to be a one-year stopgap, he looks pretty appealing. And the question, I think, is not whether Michigan would want to get a veteran quarterback in the portal. It's whether they've precluded that by acquiring Bryce Underwood.
I mean, I have to imagine that they haven't. I think that Bryce Underwood and his family seem to be pretty understanding of what the world is like and what he's stepping into. I think that there'll be competition, and it might take the top off your ability to recruit somebody like a Miller Moss if it's not a guarantee he's going to beat out Bryce Underwood. But if you're Miller Moss, do you think you're going to lose your job to Underwood next year if you come to Michigan?
Well, I mean, there is always that possibility, right? Because sometimes guys like this, they have that Charles Woodson freshman season where they're on the bench to start, they start trickling in, and then their talent is just overwhelming. But the thing that gives me the hang up there is just Underwood's age. Like he's going to be something like 2 years younger than some guys who came in. Like when Cade came in, he was almost, I think, 20 already, turning 18 in August. So, like, there might be an argument that it's better for him to sit on the bench for a year. I don't know. Like, you bring in the number one quarterback in the country, the number one recruit in his class, and you're like, all right, just hand him the keys, and that's a viable path as well. But to me, I would like to have that veteran presence because it gives someone Underwood to aim for. And if Underwood beats that guy out, well, then, we're off to the races.
I mean, when I was writing up the Jaden Davis recruitment, I was noting him as like the guy that you want to recruit in the class before Bryce Underwood because he's kind of he was that Cade McNamara type who's been playing football forever, who get a red shirt on him. He's going to be very valuable as a fifth-year senior if you can keep him around. He'll be a great guy to be a teammate of Bryce Underwood and then maybe start after Underwood has his 3 years. And he might be a consideration next year too. We don't know what they have in that guy. So it's, I don't think that you want your current quarterback room to be your floor, right? Because as you mentioned, Bryce Underwood's going to come in next year. He's going to be 18 years old. He's going to be brand new to college.
The question is not whether it's wise for Michigan to get a portal quarterback. It's whether, like, they told Bryce Underwood they would or they wouldn't. Alex, you've been opening your mouth. What do you have?
Yeah, I mean, on that topic, you just got to do whatever Underwood wants. I mean, fundamentally, Sharon Moore's placing probably his job on Bryce Underwood's right arm, right? I mean, this is a tenure defining choice. And if Underwood hits, then Sharon's probably in good business. And if he busts, then Sharon's probably out the door. So you got to do whatever, Underwood wants. You're going to cultivate him, going to listen to what he wants to do. I think that no matter what, they're going to get another body just because your quarterback room is going to thin out a bit after this season. So you're going to get somebody from the portal. It's just a matter of if that somebody is Jack Tuttle 2.0 or it's a serious person to be the starting quarterback. That just comes down to what Underwood wants. And you look at some of those comparables that you brought up, Brian. Most of those guys didn't necessarily start in year one, right? I mean, Fields sat in year one. Quinn Ewers sat behind C.J. Stroud. Vince Young sat his year. So for the most part, that has tended to be more the pattern. But it is circumstantial to some degree, too. I mean, Trevor Lawrence came in and he was ready to go right away. So it just kind of comes down to the guy. As for Underwood himself, we should talk about his profile just a little bit. Brian, you brought up his athleticism. It's absolutely there. They run quarterback draws with him, run some reads with him. He looks good in the open field, makes guys miss. But for me, the big thing is his deep ball. I mean, it is a rocket launcher arm. Vertical passing game is absolutely there. Watching a 2022 highlight reel of his when he was a sophomore, and the ball just flies out of his arm, 50, 60 plus yards down the field. And his completion percentage in high school was really good too, which is something I always look for. So it's an accurate arm, but it's a powerful arm as well. Throwing motion looks pretty clean. He's been a starter for a bunch of years. He's been a winner. It's really every box you want ticked in a prospect like this.
Yeah, I mean, there are some concerns. I was watching like full games, as I mentioned, and he has a tendency to overlook safeties. There was a couple picks that I saw that were obviously he's a high school player, so those are going to be inevitable when you're asking him to make like throws on posts and stuff like that. But like, there are certain guys who are the number one quarterback in the country because it's like, okay, this guy's been in the hands of a quarterback coach since he was 10. You know, your Archie Mannings, your Matt Barkleys, and then there are guys who are just clearly capable of being high-level NFL quarterbacks that have, you know, size, speed ratios that are completely out of whack. Those are your Vince Youngs and your Terrell Pryors, and he's much more in that latter group. Like, he's not a guy who's super polished at this point, and again, he's young. So you wouldn't even expect him to be if he had that upbringing where he's, you know, literally a Manning.
Yeah, I mean, he's young, but he's also started 4 years of high school at this point, so he's gotten the experience. It's just the physical, you know, his arm has gotten he's physically gotten larger. His arm has shifted in strength. Originally, he wasn't. I mean, his freshman year, it wasn't like the big arm quarterback. It was the guy who was like such a leader at 14 years old, and that kind of came along as he, you know, as he aged into into being a, you know, into an adult body. So there's a lot. There's that, but I wouldn't overplay. He's not like Jair Hill, who was just like a young and super raw and hadn't played that position in high school, and then like was going to learn cornerback, which is super difficult. He does have to learn. You know, there's no way to get around it. You have to learn a lot to be a quarterback in college these days, right? Defenses have only gotten more complex. Not necessarily as complex as Michigan's was last year, but there's going to be a lot more zone these days. It's not like when Terrell Pryor came in and, you know, if you could run, that was mostly what the offenses were, and passing games were fairly simple and easy to learn because that wasn't what you're going to lean on. He's going to have to pass in a modern passing game, and I think he understands this. I don't think that anyone could go through where he's been and like say like I want to go somewhere to start.
Well, no, I mean, I don't necessarily think that's the case, but particularly I think if you look at Vince Young's early career, it's like, okay, this guy is an incredible athlete, and then the passing game was, you know, fairly rudimentary for couple of years, and it was only when we played Texas in that Rose Bowl
Yeah,
that it was like, oh, now he's there,
right.
and then his next year was the Heisman season.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's maybe that's just what Michigan wants to do anyway, is like, you're like, well, if we bring in a stopgap quarterback next year, how good are we, and like, is it worth that compared to like, let's just roll with Underwood, and then year 2 or year 3, when he has that extra 12 games of experience, maybe he's that increment better and you're in a better position to do something big time. So
yeah,
the other
offensive line
Underwood
recruiting
item that is of interest is its effect on the rest of the recruiting class. LSU commit Derek Meadows, a 6'5" wide receiver out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, was an LSU commit, widely rumored to be following Bryce Underwood if he did flip. And now that Bryce Underwood has flipped, we've seen a Wilt Fong crystal ball for him come in. So it feels like that's another guy who we could end up seeing in the class very, very quickly. Nico Collins type player. And if you know me, I always like to have a Nico Collins type player. The other two guys that might have a quick impact on are Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng, who's a linebacker out of IMG, who Michigan has already fielded some predictions for. But, you know, it's like, well, what's the class going to look like? And now that you have the number one recruit in the country in the class, it feels like that is much less of a question. Then Sam Webb asserts that they're going to kick the tires on Grayson Littleton, who's a quarterback recruit that they were pretty confident they were going to get, but who ended up at Clemson. So he's a guy who might they'll see. I mean, a guy who just committed to another school is often not a very viable.
Yeah, well,
course.
yes and no. Littleton's a weird story because the way that Clemson recruits, he was committed to Clemson for a while. And if you're committed to Clemson, they don't let you take visits. So he had to decommit from Clemson to go and take a Michigan visit and then recommitted, which I kind of read that as he saw Michigan, Michigan's in it. They got their say, but he wanted to go back to the status quo. And Michigan, I don't think, is out of that recruitment at all. I think that was, if he wasn't at Clemson, which has like a very weird way of dealing with their, if you're committed or not, I don't think that he would be like a flip candidate, if that makes sense.
Finally, Andrew Olesh, who's a commit, tight end, top 50 recruit in the class. He's been looking at other schools like Penn State, Alabama. That this should probably, well, I'm not going to say it's going to lock him down, but it should help quite a bit. All right, so we're going to take a break, come back, and now we will talk about the Northwestern Wildcats.
Since 2001, Underground Printing has been the Ann Arbor original. Starting from a West Quad dorm room and growing into the go-to source for custom apparel and Michigan gear. Whether you're gearing up for game day or creating custom design for your team or business, Underground Printing has you covered. With 3 convenience stores right on campus, getting your hands on high-quality Wolverine gear has never been easier. Visit Underground Printing today, in-store or online at shop.undergroundshirts.com, where Michigan pride meets top-notch service.
Mullings dragging Trojans, broke free. Mullings dragging Trojans, dragging Trojans.
It's Nick Hopwood, CFP and founder of Peak Wealth Management. Learn how to retire with peak confidence at peakwm.com/mgoblog. A lot of people don't realize we have a special arrangement with the University 401, 403, 457 retirement plan. If you're a university employee or even a former university employee, you can add us as your advisor to your account. And my bet is that we can help you optimize your situation, especially when it comes to taking advantage of the mega backdoor Roth option with the 457. If you're highly compensated, I can show you a way to contribute over $60,000 per year to the university plan.
Mullings dragging Trojans, broke free. Mullings in the clear. It's a foot race. He'll get tracked down, but he comes up with the biggest play of the day.
Jake Butt here, guys, live down from the National Championship Convention Center down in Houston, and we got some big-time news for you guys, Michigan faithful. We need your help to keep our team. Last year, Champion Circle launched the One More Year Fund to support key players coming back, like Blake Corum, Trevor Keegan, and Zach Sinner, who elected to return to Michigan for one more year. Now we're launching the Those Who Stay NIL campaign. Our rivals are coming after many of our key players, trying to induce them to leave Michigan. It's time for the Michigan family to show our players how much we appreciate them and want them back in the maize and blue. To keep the momentum going, head over to thosewhostayuofm.com. Again, that is thosewhostayuofm.com to support. Go Blue.
Oh my God, it's Owen Rosen. You're back.
I am back.
Oh man, I'm so glad to have you back with us. So you got a new company, Royal Oath Insurance, OATH.
You got it, Royal Oath Insurance, right out of Clinton Township. Super excited to be back.
I'm so glad, man. We had so many people, word of mouth. They told me they went through you before. They say you're the Swiss Army knife of insurance.
Yeah, something like that. Jumped off for a bit. Was actually working for an actual insurance carrier, but I'm back in the game, and a lot of people have reached out to me in the meantime. But super excited to be back and helping the MGO blog community and the entire Michigan community. Absolutely.
And you do Michigan, but you can also help in other states too, correct?
We can. That was something in the past really I didn't have as much capability of, but definitely can do that. I know we've got Michigan Nation all over the country. So
all right, cool. All right, tell people where they can call you.
586-229-1026.
All right, or visit Royal Oath, OATH, right? RoyalOathInsurance.com.
Yep, call or text me anytime.
All right, thanks, Owen. I'm so glad to have you back.
Thanks, Seth. Glad to be back.
Welcome back to MGoRadio 10.10. We now turn our attention to the Northwestern Wildcats, one of the few teams in the country that can credibly claim to have a worse offense than Michigan. Alex.
Yeah, they check in at 122nd in SP Plus offense coming into this game, and it's not a super pretty picture, but I don't think it's that surprising given what we thought coming into the year. The issues start at quarterback, but it's far from the only one. Last year, Northwestern was the surprise team in the Big Ten when they turned their program around. They won 8 games. They were powered at quarterback last year by Ben Bryant, who was a transfer, and Brendan Sullivan, and they kind of switched off between those guys to get the results they did, and then both left. Bryant was out of eligibility, and Sullivan transferred to Iowa, so that has left Jack Lausch as the starting quarterback. I went into that game with pretty low expectations, the one I charted against Ohio State, and honestly, he wasn't that bad in that one, but there's been some lows as well against Iowa and Indiana in particular, or not Indiana, the Washington, and they only had 5 points. And Lausch surpassed Mike Wright, who was the start of the year, a Vanderbilt transfer. He did it mostly because he's a little bit better of a passer. The legs are fairly similar. They run Lausch a lot, which is a good thing to do because the receivers are not very good. The pass protection is not very good. If you give Lausch a little bit of time, he's decently accurate in looking what he wants to do, but the reads are not always there, and then the protection breaks down, and then it can kind of go off the rails. So it's not the best quarterback situation in the world.
Yeah, so it's sometimes you have to squint at the Pro Football Focus grades because it looks like Cam Porter, who's their main running back, is one of their better players on offense. But then you remember how they graded like Blake Corum and all this stuff. So I plugged in just Big Ten running backs, at least 100 carries. He's 19th out of 20. And he comes in at, they just grade running backs much more generously than they grade, say, anyone who's going to issue up a run block. So they have Bryce Kurtz at wide receiver. They have AJ Henning, who I'm sure Michigan fans remember. Kurtz is obviously a downfield guy. Henning is more of the slot guy, but he does go downfield. And then they don't really have anything else. So tight ends are terrible. They dump it off to the running backs a bunch. And just the other wide receivers past the top 2 sort of factor in occasionally. One of them is named Calvin Johnson II.
No relation.
He's terrible. And it just bothers me. So you can't be Calvin Johnson 2.0 and 1 be listed at 5'11", and I know what that means. That means you're 5'9". Mm-hmm. And 2 have 8 catches on 19 targets as a junior. You gotta change your name. You gotta be somebody else.
Be like Cal.
Yeah,
Cal Johnson.
Yeah, it's a pretty grim situation at the skill positions. They have experience at those positions. I mean, AJ Henning's been in college football a while. Cam Porter was a guy that has been at Northwestern forever. If you go back to the last time we played Northwestern, in my piece for that week, it's just 3 years ago, by the way, I was like, oh, they had expectations for Cam Porter, but then he got injured in training camp. That's a bummer. And so that just kind of puts into context that he was an established returning piece 3 years ago, and he's still there now. So they've got guys that have been around. Even Bryce Kurtz, I think, is in his 6th year. But those players, as experienced as they are not, star level players in the context of the broader conference. And that's a problem because they just don't have guys that can sort of outperform the other pieces dragging this offense down. Like you think about Michigan's offense, which has a lot of similar problems, especially quarterback at offensive line. But Michigan's offense is better because Mullings and Edwards and Colston Loveland they're just better than Kurtz and Henning and Porter. They're just a cut above that. They can make some plays that, able to carry some of the load. And these guys, while as decent as they are not good enough to drag an offense that has no other wide receivers, that has no tight ends, that has not great blocking, that has bad quarterback play on the whole, to anything, resembling respectability.
So, yeah, Zach Lujan is the other comparable to Michigan. Is Kirk Campbell and Zach Lujan are kind of both first-year offensive coordinators who were brought up because they were young and supposed to be up-and-comers and haven't really figured out who their talent is. So Lujan didn't really settle on Lausch until a couple games into the season. And he wanted to be what he was at South Dakota State, which is like multi-tight ends, 2, 3, 4 tight ends sometimes out there. And they played a lot of tight ends. They have Thomas Gordon as their main guy, and then Marshall Lang as their second guy. And then they have like an A.J. Williams type. I don't think he's caught a pass all year, but they're just guys. And they're putting his offensive game plan was to basically use those guys and run off of them and have Cam Porter carry the team. And it took him a couple games to realize that he's playing his worst players and putting everything on them. They also, I can't figure out who they want to have start at on their offensive line. They're going with Azomo Orotakai now as a true freshman at left guard after Nick Herzog was injured and then got healthy, but they still didn't want to put him back there. And then the same thing happened to Cooper Lovelace, who was a previous starter. So it's like I think they have problems identifying who should even be on the field.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I don't know if they have any better options. Like in terms of this isn't necessarily a Michigan thing where they have proven players they're not playing like that. They just don't have the talent. And so you talk about putting tight ends on the field, and obviously it's like, well, why are they playing 2 tight ends a lot when they have 0 tight ends? It's like, well, they also have 0 wide receivers after their top 2. So difference between playing at 11 and 12 is kind of just whatever. I mean, they just don't have the horses skill position wise. And the same thing on the offensive line. I think Caleb Tiernan, their left tackle, is pretty good, but otherwise they just don't have a lot of answers. They're rotating on the interior. I don't see anyone really that stands out to me. And the right tackle, Ben Rather, who's been pretty decent overall this season, just got gobbled up by Ohio State in the game I charted. I mean, it wasn't the full Evan Link, but it was a 80% Evan Link. I think he got a 14 in pass pro in that game. And so you just watch him against Ohio State, and they can't really block. They can't give their quarterback time. They just don't have explosive weapons. They don't have the players. They don't have the talent.
Yeah, and Tiernan's interesting because he is a state of Michigan recruit. Came out of Catholic Central, I think.
Michigan recruited him.
Has a year of eligibility left. Playing pretty well. Could be a guy to keep an eye on in the portal.
Kurt Anderson recruited him. Kurt Anderson's now at Eastern. So I imagine that's a phone call that's going to be made.
Yeah. So we're going to take a break, come back, and discuss the Northwestern defense.
Hey, it's Nick Hopwood, certified financial planner and founder of peakwm.com/mgoblog. If you're wondering where you stand relative to your retirement goals, keep us in mind. Can we help you retire with peak confidence? Yes. Can they catch him?
No! Donovan Edwards again, 85 yards!
Hey, fellow Michigan fans, this is Matt Demarest, Realtor and Lender. For a decade now, you've heard me on the podcast talk about mortgages, and I've helped hundreds of fellow Michigan fans in that capacity, including Brian and Seth. But many of you don't know I'm a real estate broker as well. I promise to make buying, selling, or financing homes simple and cost-effective anywhere in the state of Michigan. Whether you're upsizing, downsizing, buying a vacation home, or building a real estate investment portfolio, send me a text or give me a call. It's never too early to make a plan, and the call is always free. My number is 734-882-8194. Again, 734-882-8194. Or you can find me online at realtorandlender.com. That's realtorandlender.com. Whether you want to buy, sell, or finance a home, or even all three, I promise to provide the experience so many of you have come to expect over the years. And as always, thank you, and go blue. NMLS 1011726, Equal Housing Lender.
The only thing we can be sure of about the future is that it will be absolutely fantastic. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough made possible by developments in communications.
Arthur C. Clarke's 1964 vision is now reality with SignalWire, a cloud platform that enables developers to build the applications that will reshape the future of communications.
These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other wherever we may be.
You can add cutting-edge, real-time video and audio to any product, website, or application with APIs and SDKs for developers of all skill sets. SignalWire is optimized for high quality and low latency communication functionality for video, voice, and text messaging capabilities.
Almost any skill could be made independent of distance. Men will no longer commute. They will communicate.
See for yourself at signalwire.com. Use code 2021 and receive $25 in developer credit. Go to signalwire.com.
Signalwire Communications OGs, original geeks of programmable communication.
I can't believe I'm doing this. If you find yourself in the penalty box, you want a Michigan man arguing your case, call criminal law attorney and former prosecutor Jonathan Paul tonight. It's 248-924-9458. Or visit his old website at michiganlawgrad.com.
Maize and Blue Nation, it's Tom Brady. I founded Autograph with one mission in mind: change the fan experience for the better. That's why I'm excited to announce the official launch of the Autograph app, the app that gives die-hard Wolverine fans like you a one-stop shop for your Michigan fandom. Autograph has all the best Michigan content in one place and rewards you for all the things you're already doing as a fan, like listening to this podcast. It's time to feed your fandom with the Autograph app. Let's go and go blue.
I don't know what you have planned for me. Anything's fine. Call me up and I will answer with a smile. 2 weeks recovery.
Welcome back to MGoRadio 10.10. Thank you to Magic Toaster for the interstitial music today. We turn our attention to the Wildcat defense. And Alex, I would like you to solve a conundrum for me. One is that if you go to Game on Paper, this is a top 20 rush defense in America. And if you look at Pro Football Focus, there's something like 83rd in their grading. So 3 of the last 4 weeks have given up at least 4.6 yards an attempt, but they sat on Purdue pretty heavily. And, you know, you say Purdue, it's just Purdue, but actually this year they've been running the ball fairly effectively. They've had a number of decent games, but they've kind of been on a downward trend. What are we expecting out of this Northwestern rush defense?
I think they're okay. I'm not sure they're top 20. I don't think they're terrible either. Their players in their front seven are just sort of there. Like they're fine. And that's kind of the story of the defense overall, where it just feels like they're kind of lacking big time star caliber players. Like their defensive front, they rotate a lot on the defensive line. I don't think there's a big difference between their first string and second string overall. They're definitely capable of being moved up front, and that can create wins for you. But their linebackers, I think, are pretty good at identifying the plays, getting downhill, all that stuff, making tackles. I think this defense tackles pretty well overall, so you're not going to rip off like a ton of 30, 40-yard big plays on the ground. It's usually just, okay, they got past the first level, they got 4 or 5 yards, then boom, the linebacker's there to tackle. And then, you know, you'll have your stuffs and TFLs in between there, but I definitely think a team with a decent offensive line can grind these guys out at 4 or 5 yards a pop. But at the same time, they're not at all, in my eyes, a bad run defense like we've seen it in opponents in the past.
Yeah. So as a pass defense, they don't look very good. They're about 100th in per pass allowed, and it doesn't seem like they have that guy that they've had the past few years where it's like, okay, we're Northwestern, but we have a couple of NFL safeties. We might have a cornerback who's pretty good. It just feels like there isn't that guy in the back seven that pops out at you.
Yeah, that's the story of the whole defense overall. I mean, you think back to when we saw these guys, or honestly, just going back to even before that, 2018, 2020, they won the West both years. They had some really good players in that back, the secondary in particular. They had Newsome in 2020. He was a first-round pick in the NFL draft. Brandon Joseph was an All-American safety. He's now on the Lions 53-man roster, playing occasional meaningful snaps in the league. This year, it just doesn't feel like it. I went through a bunch of mock draft, big board type stuff where it was 200, 300 names. I didn't see any Northwestern players on that list, really anywhere to be found. And so they have Theron Johnson, a corner who I think is pretty solid, but that's not a big thing for Michigan. They're not going to throw at him anyway, so they can just avoid that. And otherwise, as a whole with this defense, you look at their PFF grades, it's a lot of guys in that like 60 to 70 grade range, or, maybe lower it down to 55, but a lot of guys that are just there. And I think that this defense is pretty well coached. They seem to know what's going on. They know how to run their base stuff. They know where to be. They don't make a lot of dumb mistakes. They don't blow a lot of tackles, but they're just not that talented. They don't have the athleticism. That's why I think running outside the tackles and trying to just get matchups in space on these guys is a good idea. And they don't really have big time star impact players that they've had at points in the past when Northwestern's been at their peak.
I wanted to add, they did have a guy who was supposed to be one, like their dude of the year was Xander Mueller, who was their middle linebacker who's been injured almost all year. And I think he's fallen off the draft boards because they're, worried if he can come back from that. But that was a huge hit to them, even if like their backup is decent, but their backup's kind of a walk-on guy. And the other linebacker isn't a walk-on, but Matt Uline is kind of like that kind of style of linebacker, you know what I mean? So they lost the heart of their defense. And the other thing is Northwestern has not been able to play the portal. And like we've seen some of these teams that we faced this year, Indiana obviously, but teams have been able to go out and get players to fill in their gaps. And Northwestern, I don't know if there's a school problem going on there. I don't know if it's a program or just the state of the program because of the the coaching switch or whatever. But they're kind of relying on guys that they recruited and developed. And David Braun's only in his second year, so he's really relying on guys that Hankwitz recruited before he retired. And, he's running Hankwitz's system, which is a good system, and it's actually Lloyd Carr's old system. But and it works because the players were the guys they recruited, but they're the 3 stars they could recruit in the middle of a coaching change, not really impact guys.
So this looks like it's going to be a rock fight. I don't really have a whole lot of expectations that any team is going to go up and down the field in this game. It does kind of give off Moon vibes, although hopefully Michigan will be less incompetent than that particular Brady Hoke team. What are we feeling for a final score, Alex?
It's probably going to be a slog. I would say maybe like 20-10 or something like that. The thing with Northwestern that is worth noting is that they've just had some big issues that pop up in games, special teams in particular. I know they don't grade out that badly in FEI, but they've had kicks blocked. They had a punt blocked by Ohio State. They've taken 2 safeties. You watch some of these games, like the one against Wisconsin, they fumble the ball. Lausch does on the 3-yard line, gives Wisconsin a touchdown. They also take a safety. And against Ohio State, they're looking frisky early in that game, but the first drive, Lausch fumbles in the red zone. And then later on, they get a punt blocked inside their own 10, hands Ohio State a touchdown. Like they've had chances to be, legitimately in games, and they just kind of let it get away from them. And so I think if you're Michigan, you just play field position, trust that your offense can outperform their offense, your defense can outperform their defense, and just wait for them to make a big mistake on special teams or make a big turnover.
Special teams is kind of it could go either way because Joseph Hyman's their kick returner, and he's returns 82% of the balls that he catches, so he's going to try to bring it back, and he averages 30 yards a return. So it's like sometimes he gets to the 45, sometimes he gets to the 5, and that could be a big swing. The other thing is their kicker's been injured, so they moved their punter over to kicker, and he's 6'9", long of 43. He's not very good. But they also had him stop punting because he had to focus on kicking, so now they got the backup punter. And they're 94th and 108th in FEI in those 2 categories. So special teams could be a big swing, or it could just be, they're 36 overall mostly because of Hyman's returns. And A.J. Henning is a punt returner, obviously. So, those are places where, that's where the things could swing back and forth in this game, special teams.
Well, Seth, you have a prediction?
Yeah, Maloon. Maloon, Michigan 10, Northwestern nothing. Maloon.
Oh, all right. Great. Wonderful. I'll go 15-4 Michigan. We're going to take a break, come back, and talk about the Tarleton State Charlatans.
Hi, this is Pete with Sharon's Heating and Air Conditioning. You've probably noticed that we are terrible about keeping our podcast advertisements up to date and topical to Michigan sports. Probably because we're so busy doing preventative maintenance for all of our many happy customers. We know no one is excited to call their HVAC contractor, and to make that a rare occurrence, you should regularly maintenance your system. Call us or text us to find out more about the benefits of our preventative maintenance plans, including savings on service calls and priority scheduling. Whatever the season, we want you to be comfortable for that next glorious Michigan victory.
Frustrated with your current e-commerce agency? Then it's time to meet Human Element, a digital marketing and web development agency with 20 years of experience building B2B and B2C websites. See us as an extension of your team, accessible, responsive, and strategic. We work with you to understand your goals so that we can build something that drives revenue and delights your customers. So if you're looking for an agency that acts as a true partner in your e-commerce business, visit human-element.com/partner. We can't wait to work with you.
In southeastern Michigan, the yearly cost for a nursing home averages approximately $100,000. It doesn't have to, though. Reed McCarthy founded Ann Arbor Elder Law after handling a tricky situation for his own family. Years of experience later, his boutique firm works with clients across southeast Michigan, dealing with Medicaid planning, long-term care, and tax, disability, and family law, not to mention family dynamics. If you have a family member who may need that level of care, or if you're ready to start your own estate plan, Reed can give you a plan for the future. Visit AnnArborElderLaw.com or call 734-945-9693. That's 734-945-9693.
Winewood Organics is Ann Arbor's only cannabis microbusiness. It's a place where plants are grown in living soil, where nearly every product is made, mixed, trimmed, and packed by hand, where first-time customers save 25% on everything from old-school hash to live resin carts. You can find them just west of downtown or at winewoodorganics.com. Winewood Organics, a place where the weed is better. Since 2001, Underground Printing has been the Ann Arbor original, starting from a West Quad dorm room and growing into the go-to source for custom apparel and Michigan gear. Whether you're gearing up for game day or creating custom design for your team or business, Underground Printing has you covered. With 3 convenience stores right on campus, getting your hands on high-quality Wolverine gear has never been easier. Visit Underground Printing today, in-store or online at shop.undergroundshirts.com, where Michigan pride meets top-notch service.
It's the time of year where cracks in your defense get exposed. Good thing the fix is a phone call away. Community Pest Solutions is a lockdown defender for homes and businesses. If you're hearing noises in your walls or attic or dealing with bug problems, it's time to call Community. To schedule an inspection, just Google Community Pest Solutions or hit up their website at pestfreemi.com. Welcome back to MGoRadio 10.10. Now turning to the hardwood. Michigan beats Tarleton State last night, 72-49. Tarleton State is outside the top 300 in KenPom, so not a whole lot of traction in rankings for a thorough beatdown. But we did see some important developments in a couple of problem areas. One is that Michigan had merely 11 turnovers. That's a 17% turnover rate and would be above average if they were to sustain that for a long period of time. I think the other development is that Michigan won a game fairly handily where they shot 6 of 22 from 3. And the opposition shot 50% from 3 because one guy went 5 of 7 after being a career 27% shooter coming into this one. So Tarleton State came into this year having been rated by the portal. They're not going to be very good, so we don't want to take away too much about it. But we actually went to this game together, Seth, and
yeah,
I halfway through the first half, I turned to you and I was like, a good process, but they're just not hitting a bunch of bunnies. And it felt like they had a better idea of where people were going to be, what passes they were able to make, and even one of those turnovers was a lane violation, which counts as a turnover from Danny Wolf. So the other sources of the turnovers were entry passes to Golden that I felt didn't get charged to Golden, but maybe could have, probably should have been. And then, Kaysen had one, Cheddar had a couple. It just
They had a
scattered
5-second violation too, trying to near the end of the game. Like there was some of it was just whatever that game,
Yeah, and this is not a tall team that they went up against. There's going to be tougher opponents on the schedule, but they were playing some fairly weak teams early in the year, and it didn't matter, and they were still posting 25% turnover rates. So that does feel like a little bit of progress. The other thing that kind of pops out from the box score is that we seem to have had a little bit of a shakeout in terms of the minutes. So you have the starting five in this one, and you have Sam Walters with 21 minutes, Reuben Jones with 20. And you have Kaysen, Pippen, Cheddar, and Fat with 8, 7, 7, and 5 minutes respectively. So it kind of feels like this might be a game where we see that this is kind of the rotation going forward, where Walters and Jones are going to be major contributors, and then they're just going to see if anyone else is kind of poking their head up in that particular game. Give them some run, but if it's the second half and it's competitive, I don't know if we're going to see a whole lot other than the top 7.
Yeah, it looks like kind of the team that I have a really hard time putting the chart together for, because it's Ken Palm right now thinks that Wolf is the center when he's on the floor with Golden, just because Golden's usage and whatnot, but also just because there's just going to be a group of guys who get 7 to 8 minutes per game, and we were having the conversation who's going to fall out of the rotation here right as Cheddar put a ball on his knees and had a turnover, and it's just like maybe him. But we've seen Will Cheddar come out and have great games, and you expect that he's going to do that too. I think that Walter seems like a guy who maybe has a bigger role than we imagined preseason, that he's kind of the sixth man of this team now. And you got the 5 starters, and you mentioned in your article this week before this game that the defense for the 5 starters is just dramatically different. Reuben Jones considered kind of maybe a 6th starter, but defense when those guys are on the court.
I had was just when you had both Golden and Wolf on the floor together.
Yeah.
Which is about a third of Michigan's possession so far. And kind of contrary to expectations entering the season, so far it's a much better defensive lineup than offensive lineup. I think part of that has to do with the fact that Wolf just hasn't really felt comfortable in the role that they're asking him to play yet, which makes sense because he's a center last year, and now he's playing this 4 spot, and they want him to be able to run these pick and rolls. They want him to be able to be a primary initiator for the offense, and it just feels like it's not quite coming yet. So Wolf has 1 assist in this game, 2 turnovers. One of them is a lane violation. Don't really care about that. But he airballs a 3, and he's got a bagel on the scoreboard until the second half. And it just kind of like there were a number of possessions where he had the ball and he tried to initiate offense, and he just kind of got cut off by a smaller guy. And it's possible that this isn't a good matchup for him in particular, because if he's going to take someone off the dribble and they're 6'8" or they're 6'10", he's got a quickness advantage there. But when you're going up against a guy who's 6'6" or 6'7", that's maybe not going to be the case. So he got stymied on the perimeter a lot and was fairly ineffective. The good news from Michigan's perspective is that both Roddy Gale and Trey Donaldson were extremely effective inside the arc. Gale has been spotty so far, I would say, but in this game, took his opportunities well. And when he gets to the basket, you can see why he was a top 50 recruit, because he just elevates in ways that makes me think that his finishing at the rim is going to be extremely repeatable, especially in a Dusty May offense that has a lot of creative ways to get you a good shot.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned, the difference between Wolf going against 6'6" guys who are, kind of wing or power forward level athleticism versus Gale, who by the second half, he recognized anytime he saw one of those guys going up against him, he's like, okay, I'm going to the rim, good luck. And they had a couple transition baskets like that where he just took a guy off and he was like, good luck. I have too much athleticism for you to handle. And that's going to be something that happens in the Big Ten too, because the great mid is coming, and they're, Tarleton State's level of athleticism is not their problem, really. It's just these guys are all brand new with each other and brand new players and kind of playing down a position from where they should be. But, like, speed and whatnot is not particularly different than what you're going to see in a less than NBA standing situation which is a lot of the Big Ten. So I see that in Gale, and I think that's going to happen for him. There was something you said to me during the game when Walters, they were on a fast break, and Walters just stopped, let the attempted defense go past him, and then put the shot up. And it's something that we haven't seen from Golden. He kind of rushes his shots every single time he gets the ball down low.
Well, so Golden's 4 of 8 from 2 in this game. So they got him a reasonable number of shots, which is great. That's something we want to see him work on, and we want the team to work on it. But he should have probably been 8 of 8 from the floor,
right.
maybe 7 of 8. So he's catching the ball up high and like he's in the air. And instead of coming down, gathering, and going up, he's just trying to put it in while he's still in the air. It's a much tougher shot than it needs to be. And, the context is important here. It's not like there's a 7'4" guy who's going to swat his shot when you're playing Tarleton State.
Right.
So in contrast to that, there was an event where Walters was able to gather, get a flyby from a guy who was coming back on a partial breakaway, and then just simply finish. And that's not something I think we've seen from Golden so far, is that patience and the faith in your footwork and your ability to just get the ball up at the rim and get it in there. And it's kind of strange because he's the guy who should be the most comfortable.
Yeah.
He's the one who was in Dusty May's team last year. And in a lot of ways, he feels like one of the less comfortable players out there, because I think Donaldson feels pretty comfortable. Gale does. Like, Burnett is thriving.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were a couple times in this game where Dusty May just pulled off both of the 7-footers because he was really frustrated with what's going on with both of them.
Yeah.
So, I've been suggesting that I wasn't really a huge fan of the two big lineup. And with the way Walters is playing, like, this is a guy who's shooting 52% on threes right now, and he's got 21 of them to his name, and they all look like every single one of them looks like it's going in.
Yeah.
He's actually been able to mix in a little bit of stuff inside the arc as well. But even as a guy who's just a shooter, who gives you a reasonable amount of defense with his long arms and his ability to move, he's not a great rebounder. He's probably never going to be a great rebounder. But it just feels like I would like to see Walters get maybe a few more minutes. And the place where those minutes come from is probably one of the centers. And so you're not running that 2-center lineup out there more often. Now, you don't want to give up on something that could come around, right?
Yeah.
Like, if Wolf's able to get a little bit more settled. There was one big-to-big pass in this game where Wolf flashes to the high post and is able to dump it down to Golden for an easy bucket. And that particular sequence looked like something that you really want to spend some time building on. He is a talented passer. And maybe what the deal is you don't use his on-ball playmaking, but just the fact that he is a guy who is a threat from the outside, despite what happened in this game, who does flash the post and is very difficult to cut off because he's probably going to be significantly bigger than whoever is checking him. So there is a tantalizing thing in there that I understand that you want to explore. So in general, thing I was very encouraged by is Michigan came out of the locker room after halftime, and they had 3 or 4 really pretty possessions that got Michigan easy looks, open looks. And that kind of felt sometimes like what happened when, a Beeline team came out of the locker room in the second half, where they had spent some time breaking down what the opposition was going to do. They put in some plays that were likely to work. And there were games where, Michigan would scuffle through a first half under Beeline. And then when they were on the same side of the court their coach was, they generally had a better second half. I kind of felt like there was a hint of that in this game. So, overall, you're not going to learn a whole lot against Ken Palm number 305, but so far so good. There was a moment in this game where it was a little bit dodgy because Michigan wasn't making any shots and Tarleton State was, and then they just kind of won on shot volume, which is something they haven't been able to do early in the year. So if they're able to, grab some offensive rebounds, defend their own glass, I think their shooting and their ability to get good shots is going to make them a really good team.
Yeah.
Up next on Monday is Virginia Tech in the
Fort
first round
Myers.
of Fort Myers.
Yeah.
Whatever. Virginia Tech is very bad.
They
lost to Penn State by 22 and just lost to Jacksonville by 10. So this should be a game where Michigan is comfortably favored to win. And then if they win, I think they actually get a day off before a Wednesday game against what should be a pretty good Xavier team.
I mean, South Carolina could beat Xavier too, but either way, you're going to get a pretty good team to face that will look good.
And then after that, you have Wisconsin, Iowa, Arkansas, and Oklahoma before a couple of late December bye games. So this is going to be a stretch here of about 5 straight games against top 50 KenPom teams. None of them are like top 10. They're all kind of in the back half of that top 50. But this is going to be the stretch that kind of determines whether they go into this Big Ten season thinking like, okay, if we're middle of the pack, we're in, or we got to do a little bit better than that. Because they'll probably pick up a couple of these games, right?
Yeah.
But they don't have really the opportunity for a marquee non-conference win because, Arkansas is the best they got. And Arkansas is going to be an interesting team this year, but I don't think they're going to be a great one.
Yeah. No, that's why it's so important to beat Virginia Tech. And by the way, they're terrible because they lost their point guard who was going to be their star, Heiser Miller. So now they are using kind of just a shooter guy, and everyone else is having to try to create more. And it's Tarleton State, but not as untalented, where they just, they have a guy who's at Duke who couldn't make it at Duke, and they got a guy at VCU who couldn't make it at VCU. And it's really going to be can Michigan play above the rim against these guys? Which, by the way, my hot take after watching this Tarleton State game is, do we have to practice our alley-oops? Because it looks like they're going to be there. And every time we try one, it just looks so pathetic. And like,
because Gale had a pretty rad dunk. So, like, he'll come. I guess gotta figure it out. It does feel like a lot of these entry passes to Golden are asking him to do very difficult things. So, like, he'll come down, gather, and try to go up instead of just flinging it at the basket. But yeah, the overall quality of pass Golden is fielding, it might be part of why his whole vibe is being disrupted.
Sure, and beat Virginia Tech because I definitely want to see Xavier on the schedule.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week.
Boris is a mayor and a land surveyor with plans of his own. He hates a Ruska, he hates a vodka, bandit from his home. He hates a Ruska, vodka, he never drank a single drop. He hates a Ruska, vodka, there's poison, he swears to stop. He's singing la da 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 da. One day Boris was visited by demons in his head.